I hope he has good life insurance because you two are going to need it, I said with a smile, setting my glass down on the worn wooden bar. Bernard, the bartender, paused mid-wipe, his rag hovering over the counter like he wasn't sure if he should keep cleaning or brace for something heavier. He gave me a glance, the kind that said he knew exactly what I meant but wasn't about to get involved. That was the thing about guys like him. They saw everything, said little, and carried even less. Didn't think you'd be back in Mesa Ridge, he said, leaning against the bar. Neither did I. I reached for my beer, letting the bitter taste settle in my mouth. Mesa Ridge wasn't much, just another Arizona town with too many gas stations and not enough shade. I'd been through 100 places like it, selling my leatherwork at farmers' markets, shaking hands, telling stories, and moving on before anyone expected me to stay. But this town used to be home. Bernard hesitated before speaking again. You know about her, then? I nodded. No need for pretense. Bernard wasn't the kind to spread gossip without reason. If he was telling me, it was because he figured I ought to know. How long? I asked, my voice even. He scratched his jaw. Year, maybe more. She started showing up at the university a lot, took a class or two. That's how it started. A year. That meant it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This was something chosen, something nurtured. I took another drink, setting the glass down with a little more weight than before. Who is he? Bernard sighed, tossing the rag over his shoulder. Some professor. Bryson O'Connor. Teaches philosophy. Talks real smooth, wears those round glasses that make him look like he knows more than he does. I let that sit. A professor. Not some hotshot businessman. Not some young idiot who made her feel attractive again. A guy who sat in an office and talked in circles for a living. Figures, I said, shaking my head. Look, Elias, I don't want to be in the middle of this. You're not, I said, standing. I tossed a 20 on the counter and grabbed my keys. He sighed. You sure you want to go digging? Ain't nothing good gonna come from it. I smiled at that. A small, sharp thing. Oh, something good will come from it. Mesa Ridge hadn't changed much in the years since I'd left. The same streets, the same houses, the same damn grocery store where I used to pick up a six-pack on my way home. The only thing different was me. I pulled up outside my old house and killed the engine. I didn't park in the driveway. That wasn't my place anymore. The lights were on inside, the living room warm and lived in. A pair of shoes sat by the door, men's shoes, polished and neat. That was confirmation enough. I sat there for a while, watching. Not because I needed more proof, but because I wanted to feel the weight of it. The finality. After a while, I reached into my glove box, pulled out a pack of cigarettes I'd been saving for nights like this, and lit one up. I didn't even smoke much anymore, but something about the burn in my lungs felt right. I wasn't going to kick in the door. Wasn't going to scream or beg. That wasn't how this was going to go. Olivia always wanted a man who could challenge her, someone who could match her in conversation, in wit. She never understood that there was a different kind of intelligence, the kind that didn't need to prove itself in a classroom, the kind that knew when to wait and when to strike. I exhaled slowly, watching the smoke curl toward the windshield. She had made her choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. I stayed in that truck until the cigarette burned down to the filter. Watched the house. The way the light shifted in the living room. The silhouette of two people moving inside. A laugh, hers, low and familiar, like she still thought she had the right to be happy in that house. Then I started the engine and drove off. Not far, just to the end of the block where the streetlights barely reached. There was no rush. You didn't walk into a fight blind. You studied, you gathered intel, and you struck when it counted. The university was only a 10-minute drive away. It sat on the edge of town, a place full of people who thought they were too good for Mesa Ridge but not quite smart enough to leave it. The kind of place where men like Bryson O'Connor built little kingdoms out of words. I parked across from the faculty offices and waited. The campus was quiet this late, but not empty. A janitor walked out, hauling a trash bag over his shoulder. I stepped out of the truck, stretching like I was just passing through. Hey, man, I called. You work the night shift? The guy slowed, giving me a once-over. Older, tired, probably seen enough that nothing surprised him anymore. Yeah, who's asking? Just an old friend looking for Professor O'Connor. Thought I'd stop by. He snorted. That guy? Good luck. Thinks he's too important to stick around after 5. I pulled out my wallet, flipped it open just enough to show a couple of crisp 20s. You ever see him bring visitors? The janitor glanced at the money, then at me. A man weighing his options. I let the silence stretch, then added another bill to the mix. Yeah, he finally said, taking the cash. Few times. Blonde woman. Classy type. Older than the students, younger than the staff. Came in late. Left late. That was enough. I thanked him, got back in my truck, and made a call. Hey, Dave, I said when my lawyer picked up. I need to move some things around. I wasn't a rich man, but I wasn't stupid either. When I left, I hadn't given Olivia everything. A man keeps a safety net. Now it was time to tighten it. By the next afternoon, my name was the only one on the investment accounts. The house was still in both names, but she'd be paying for it alone soon enough. Next, I called an old friend in town, a guy who worked in the university's administration. Do me a favor, I said. Find out if Bryson O'Connor has any policies about faculty-student relationships, and check if he's had any complaints. The man sighed. Elias, what are you? Just do it. By the end of the day, I had what I needed. The university had strict guidelines about professors fraternizing with students. Even if she wasn't a traditional student, it was a gray enough area to make O'Connor sweat. There had been whispers about him before, nothing confirmed, but people talk. And in small towns, talk had a way of growing teeth. That night, I went back to Bernard's bar. Sat in the same seat, drank the same beer. Bernard gave me a long look, but didn't say anything. You got a plan? He finally asked. I smiled, slow and sure. I always have a plan. I spent the next morning putting the final pieces into place. This wasn't about rage, and it damn sure wasn't about making some dramatic scene. It was about control. About making sure she felt it all, the weight of her choices, the consequences that came with them. By noon, the legal paperwork was filed. Divorce proceedings started. Accounts secured. The lawyer had gone over everything twice. Olivia wouldn't see it coming. Not yet. She still thought she had the upper hand, that she was the one making the decisions. That was fine. Let her think it. I parked near the university, took my time walking across the campus. Young kids with their backpacks, professors shuffling between classes, all of them wrapped up in their own little worlds. I wasn't interested in them. My focus was on a single office in the faculty wing. Bryson O'Connor. The door was cracked open. Inside, the professor sat behind a desk, glasses perched on his nose, flipping through some thick book like it held the meaning of life. I knocked once on the frame. His head snapped up, and for a second, he just stared, trying to place me. Can I help you? He asked, voice smooth, practiced. I stepped inside, shut the door behind me. Let the silence stretch. Watched the way he shifted, the flicker of nerves in his eyes. Men like him, they weren't built for confrontation. They lived in lecture halls and behind podiums, weaving words into shields. You know who I am? I asked. He swallowed, nodded once. I assume you're Olivia's husband, I finished for him. Yeah. He straightened in his chair, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. I understand this must be difficult for you. I almost laughed. Almost. Difficult, I repeated, stepping closer. Yeah, I guess that's one word for it. But see, I didn't come here to talk about feelings. I came to let you know how this is going to go. His fingers tightened on the edge of his desk. I sat down in the chair across from him, leaning forward just enough to make sure he understood there was no space, no safety in this conversation. You're going to resign? I said, calm and steady. His brows pulled together. Excuse me. You heard me. That's ridiculous, he scoffed, leaning back. I'm tenured. My position here is secure. Whatever issues you and Olivia have, they're between you two. I smiled, but there wasn't an ounce of warmth in it. Yeah, see, that's where you're wrong. Because by tomorrow morning, the university's gonna start hearing things about a certain professor getting a little too close with a married woman, a woman who, by their own policies, qualifies as a student under his instruction. His mouth opened, then shut. I let it sink in. Let him feel it. The reality, the threat, the way his whole world could shift with just a few well-placed words. There's nothing inappropriate about our relationship, he said, but the confidence was gone now. Sure, I nodded. And I'm sure the university will see it that way too. After all, you're just a man who preaches ethics and philosophy. No reason they'd question your judgment. He stayed quiet. I stood, adjusting my jacket. You've got till the end of the week to pack up your office and make it look like your own decision. If I were you, I'd take an offer out of state. Maybe somewhere quiet. Somewhere far. I turned to leave, but before I stepped out, I looked back at him. Oh, and Bryson? He blinked. If I see you near my wife again, you won't have time to pack. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. By the time I walked back to my truck, my phone buzzed. Olivia. I let it ring. Let her sit in whatever panic she must have felt, knowing I was back in town, knowing something was coming but not sure what. She wanted to play smart? She wanted a man who challenged her? She was about to find out what that really meant. I let her call go to voicemail. Then another. Then another. By the time I pulled into town, my phone vibrated with a text. Olivia, we need to talk. Now. No pleasantries. No pretense. She knew. I parked in front of a little coffee shop, one of those places that tried too hard to look rustic. She was already there, sitting at a corner table, tapping her nails against the ceramic cup in front of her. She looked the same as ever, sharp, composed, her gray-streaked hair pulled into that same loose twist she always wore when she wanted to look effortless but put together. I slid into the seat across from her. Neither of us said anything at first. Just silence and the hum of conversation around us. She finally sighed. I take it you've been busy. I leaned back. Always. Her jaw tightened. You went to the university. I didn't answer. We both knew I had. She shook her head, let out a humorless laugh. What do you think this is, Elias? Some revenge scheme? You think you can control me like this? I tilted my head. Control you? No. Just making sure you feel what it's like when someone else makes the decisions for you. Her eyes flashed. This is childish. No, Olivia. Childish was sneaking around like a teenager. This is just settling accounts. She exhaled sharply, gripping her cup like she wanted to squeeze the argument into it. Bryson called me, she admitted. Told me you threatened him. I raised an eyebrow. I gave him options. He chose the one that keeps him breathing easy. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You think this changes anything? I think it already has. She stared at me then, and for the first time, I saw it, the flicker of doubt, the realization that she had underestimated me. She had spent years convincing herself that I was predictable, that I wasn't the kind of man to play these games. She had forgotten that I'd spent a lifetime thinking 10 steps ahead. She set her cup down with a deliberate clink. You've made your point. I smiled. I'm just getting started. She scoffed, leaning back in her chair. What else could you possibly take from me, Elias? I reached into my jacket, pulled out a folded envelope, and slid it across the table. She hesitated before picking it up. The moment she saw the return address, my lawyer's office, her fingers curled around the paper. Her face didn't change, but I knew her well enough to see the signs. The slight twitch in her jaw. The way she adjusted her shoulders like she was already bracing for the blow. Divorce, she said, voice tight. I nodded. Irreconcilable differences, though I think we both know that's just being polite. She unfolded the papers, skimmed through the terms. Her eyes darkened. You cut me out of the investments. I did. Her gaze snapped up. You don't get to do that. I held her stare, unblinking. I already did. She inhaled slowly, setting the papers down. And the house. Your name's still on it. Which means you're responsible for it now. Mortgage, maintenance, taxes. All yours. Her nostrils flared. You're really going to make me start over at 50? I gave a slow shrug. You made your choice, Olivia. This is just me making sure you live with it. She exhaled through her nose, staring down at the divorce papers. For the first time, she looked unsure. Good. I stood, smoothing out my jacket. You have a week to sign. If not, my lawyer drags this into court, and trust me, that's not a fight you want. She didn't answer. Just sat there, fingers resting on the edge of the envelope, the gears turning behind her sharp eyes. I walked away without looking back. It wasn't about getting even. It wasn't about punishment. It was about balance. And the scales were finally tipping in my favor. A week passed. She signed. Didn't call. Didn't text. Didn't try to argue. Maybe she thought silence was her way of keeping some control, holding on to whatever pride she had left. Maybe she was waiting for me to second-guess myself, to soften. If so, she was wasting her time. The house went up for sale a month later. I heard from Bernard that her parents had left town, quietly, like they didn't want to be associated with the mess. Bryson O'Connor took an indefinite leave from the university. Rumor had it he was looking at jobs out of state, somewhere without a scandal attached to his name. Mesa Ridge had a way of remembering things, and neither of them would be able to walk into a room without people knowing exactly what they did. I had no reason to stay. Randy helped me load up the last of my supplies into the truck. The kid had come a long way since I'd met him, scrappy and half-starved behind a gas station, looking for someone to buy him a meal. Now he had a solid frame, a steady hand, and enough skills in leatherwork that he could make something of himself if he wanted to. He tightened the last strap on the tarp and glanced over. So, what now? Montana, I said, checking my watch. Got some land up there. Figure I'll build something on it. He nodded like that made sense. And me. I pulled out a thick envelope from my jacket and handed it to him. He frowned but took it, flipping it open just enough to see the cash inside. That should set you up somewhere, I said. Buy tools, rent a place, start fresh. He stared at it for a second before closing it again. You don't want me coming with? I shook my head. This was never going to be permanent, kid. You knew that. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. He wasn't a kid anymore. Not really. He was old enough to stand on his own. He just needed to believe it. Finally, he nodded. All right. He stuffed the envelope into his jacket, then met my eye. Thanks. For everything. I gave a short nod. Take care of yourself. He walked off without looking back. Good. That meant he'd be fine. I climbed into my truck, started the engine, and pulled onto the highway. I didn't check my phone. Didn't need to. There was nothing left to say. Olivia was gone. Mesa Ridge was in the rear view. And up ahead, the road stretched out, open and waiting. Montana was quiet. The kind of quiet that settles into your bones that reminds you just how much noise you've been carrying around. The land was untouched, a stretch of earth and sky. Nothing but open space and opportunity. It felt right. It felt like mine. I spent the first few weeks clearing out a spot, working sunup to sundown, cutting timber, hauling supplies. It was slow work, but I didn't mind. There was a satisfaction in it and building something with my own hands. No deadlines, no expectations. Just progress, steady and sure. One evening, as I sat on the tailgate of my truck, drinking a beer and watching the sun sink below the treeline, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. A number I half recognized, one I hadn't seen in years. I let it ring twice before answering. Yeah. A pause, then a voice. Hey, Dad. I exhaled, slow and steady. Didn't think I'd hear from you. He cleared his throat. Yeah, well, figured it was about time. There was something in his tone, hesitation, maybe a little regret. I didn't press. He was calling. That was enough. How's life? I asked. Another pause, then a short laugh. Complicated. I smiled at that. Yeah, it tends to be. Silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable, just unpracticed. He was an adult now. Had his own life, his own experiences. I wasn't going to force anything. I heard about Mom, he said finally. I took a sip of my beer, letting the words settle. What exactly did you hear? She's in Phoenix. Smaller place. Got a job at some consulting firm. I nodded, not surprised. She wasn't the type to disappear completely. She'd land on her feet, even if it wasn't where she wanted. She, mentioned you. That made me pause. Yeah. She didn't ask me to call. I just wanted to. I let out a slow breath, watching the sky shift from gold to deep blue. Well, I appreciate that. Another pause, then maybe I could come up sometime. See the place. For the first time in a long while, I felt something shift inside me, not regret, not bitterness, just the possibility of something real. Something worth building. Yeah, I said, setting the bottle down beside me. I like that. The call ended soon after, and I sat there a little longer, letting the cool evening air settle around me. Olivia was a memory now. Mesa Ridge was just another stop along the road. And for the first time in years, I wasn't looking back. The future was open, and that was enough. The cabin came together piece by piece. Walls first, then the roof, then the details, windows, doors, the kind of things that made it more than just shelter. I didn't rush it. Didn't need to. There was a kind of peace in the work, in the weight of a hammer in my hand, the smell of fresh gutwood. No one telling me what to do. No deadlines, no one waiting on me to be anything but what I was. The land stretched wide in every direction. No neighbors. No noise. Just the sound of the wind through the trees and the occasional rustle of something moving in the brush. At night, the sky went on forever, no city lights to drown it out. It reminded me why I left in the first place. Why I'd walked away from the life everyone else thought I was supposed to want. A letter came in the mail one afternoon, the kind with handwriting I hadn't seen in years. My son. He hadn't made it up yet, but he was trying. A real letter, not just a text, not some half-assed message typed out in a hurry. He wrote about work, about a girl he was seeing, about things he wished he'd asked me years ago. He ended it with, I'll be there soon. Hope you're still willing to teach me a few things. I folded the letter and tucked it inside the cabin. He'd show up when he was ready. No need to rush him. Mesa Ridge? That was a lifetime ago. Bernard still ran the bar, Still heard everything, but only passed along what was worth knowing. Last I heard, Olivia had settled in Phoenix, living a quieter life. No scandals, no grand reinvention. Just another woman who'd bet wrong and had to live with it. Bryson O'Connor had taken some position out of state. Nobody cared. He was just another footnote in a story that didn't matter anymore. The kid, Randy, sent a picture a month back. His own shop now, nothing fancy, just a little leather shop in some small town out west. He looked steady. Looked like he was doing all right. That was all I needed to know. I sat on the porch that evening, watching the sun burn out behind the mountains, the last bit of light throwing shadows long across the dirt. It had been a long road, but I wasn't carrying anything extra anymore. No bitterness, no weight. Just the open land and the life I'd built with my own two hands. I took a slow sip of my whiskey, felt the burn settle deep. Didn't need a home. Didn't need revenge. Just needed a direction. And for the first time in a long damn while, I had one.